All right, are we all here, Rachel?
We are looking at a list of people that is loading right now. So give it just 1 minute. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a good crew to talk about Eric Adams tonight. It's still loading. Hold on just a moment. Yeah, I think we can get started. Go ahead, Richard.
All right. I want to thank everyone for coming here tonight. I know there are other things you could be doing. I'm Richard Kim. I'm the editor-in-chief of The City. And I think we are here in a perilous and unprecedented moment. And I know all of you read local news and care about the fate of our city, but just to recap a little bit about where we are. The mayor, Eric Adams, has been indicted on 5 counts of bribery, soliciting and taking donations from foreign nationals, and wire fraud. His first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright, has been raided by the FBI and has resigned. His second police commissioner, Ed Caban, has been raided by the FBI and has resigned. His school's chancellor, David Banks, has been raided by the FBI and resigned. The deputy mayor for public safety, Phil Banks, has also been visited by the FBI and has resigned. His senior advisor for Asian affairs, Winnie Greco, was visited by the FBI in February and has also resigned. 3 other community liaisons have been raided by the FBI and resigned or been fired, as has his senior aide, Tim Pearson. The city's reporting has been absolutely at the center of this unfolding story. We were the news outlet that broke that agents had visited the houses of David Banks and Phil Banks and Sheena Wright. We were the first outlet to report that and uncover straw donors to Eric Adams' 2021 campaign. We were also the first outlet to uncover straw donors to Eric Adams' 2025 campaign. And the reason we're able to do this is because we have an incredibly deep bench of knowledge about campaign finance and city contracts. We do really time-consuming shoe leather reporting and source cultivation, and we have an extremely proactive and aggressive policy of requesting public records. We do that as a matter of course. And you're going to hear tonight from some of the people in our newsroom that make that work happen every day and that are working to keep this city an honest place. And there is no better person to moderate this than my colleague, the one and only Rachel Holiday Smith. Rachel, I think like many, many months ago, we asked you to do an explainer. Who's investigating Eric Adams? And I think I was the editor on this, and we put on a deck, a cheeky little deck, a frequently updated guide. Ha ha. Well, I can say that Rachel has been frequently updating that guide quite a lot. And there is no better person to lead us through tonight's conversation. So with that, I'm going to pop off your screen and turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Richard. And yes, I have updated that guide dozens and dozens of times, especially in the last few weeks, but it's been going on for a year at least. So I'm Rachel Holiday Smith. I oversee explanatory journalism and service journalism at the city. And I just want to go over a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get started. We already have probably north of 40 questions from our RSU peers tonight because you all are really curious. But we are going to be taking questions now if you have burning questions about Eric Adams, the investigations, what's happening next. I see 2 questions already. Amazing. So pop those in the Q&A. We'll be sorting through them and answering as many as we can. But I want to start with some of the themes that came out of the questions that we have already got. And then I just want to give a plug for our newsletter. Could we pop up the newsletter sign up? Thank you. So a lot of you have come to us from our weekday newsletter, The Scoop. So you probably don't need this, but if you're someone who came to us from social media or your friend sent you a link to this, scan this QR code and sign up for our 5-day-a-week weekday free newsletter. It comes out every morning. It's got lots of good information, certainly would have all the updates about the Eric Adams investigations, but also lots of other news about the 5 boroughs. So I'll leave that up there for just a moment, but please sign up if you haven't already. So I'm going to just intro our wonderful panelists tonight who are stellar journalists, all of them. We have Katie Honan, who is our Room 9 reporter, meaning she works every day in City Hall. She is our City Hall reporter. She is the person who is in the room with Eric Adams asking him questions at his press conferences. Hello, Katie.
Hi.
We also have Greg B. Smith, who is a senior investigative reporter with us. He's investigated everything you can imagine in New York City, and he does incredible work on all of our reporting on Eric Adams and has been for years, back to, when he wasn't the mayor, before he was mayor. Hello, Greg.
You're making me sound really old.
You're a veteran and you've earned it. And Alyssa Katz, who is our executive editor and who has been editing so much of our reporting, has really steered the team who has been doing so much of this shoe leather reporting on Eric Adams that has gone back months and months with us. Hello, Alyssa.
Hello.
So I'm going to start out with a group of questions that were the most asked questions from our readers who RSVP'd for this event, which is, it boils down to, is Adams going to throw in the towel here? Is he going to resign? Is he going to get kicked out? Is he going to step down in a way that he wouldn't run for mayor next year? And just a reminder for folks, because we did get some questions about this, we do have a mayoral election next year, 2025. So we're going to have a new mayor after that. So I'm wondering if you think that he's actually going to continue in that race and run. So we'll do a quick lightning round. I'll start with Katie. Can you just answer it? Do you think he's going to resign? If he doesn't resign, do you think that he's going to be forced out? Or do you think that he's going to end up in that 2025 race next year?
As we sit here at, whatever day today is at 7:38, I think he's not resigning. I don't think he's getting kicked out anytime soon. And I do believe he's still planning to run for reelection. We, obviously us and other people did reporting on his campaign finance and how much money he's raised. But, the Eric Adams that we have right now, he's not stepping down. And I don't think Governor Hochul is ready to kick him out. And also that mayoral inability panel as well. I don't believe they're ready to convene at all. So,
Okay. And to take a moment to explain how he could get kicked out, because some folks might not know. And actually, if we could drop in the chat our guide on the process of either what happens when he resigns or when he gets kicked out. Basically, there are two ways for him to be kicked out. One, Governor Hochul could say unilaterally, sort of, it's time for you to go. She can conduct her own investigation and then say, it's time to step down. It's an odd thing in New York State. The governor has the power to kick out the New York City mayor. And then separately, this has never been used, but there is an ability in the city charter for an inability committee to be formed. That's a group of elected officials that would have to get together and all together say, we're going to recommend to the city council that then the city council kicks out the mayor. Nobody has, as to my knowledge, has said that they're going to do that. But those are the two kind of mechanisms for actually getting him out of office. So we'll go back to our predictions. Greg, what do you think? Is he going to resign? Is he going to get kicked out? And how about 2025?
When pigs can fly, he will resign. There's no way. There's no way. First of all, he's been indicted by the United States government. And a key bargaining chip for him is to not resign and use the possibility of him resigning if he can work out some kind of deal to avoid jail time in exchange for I agree to resign. But at any rate, so far he has made it really clear that he is going nowhere, that he's running for reelection. And there was a court hearing a couple weeks ago, and which his lawyer, the celebrity $2,000 an hour lawyer, Alex Spiro, stands up in court and says, we want a trial right now, and we're going to win it. And he's attacking the case. And as far as I can tell, this is full speed ahead. I don't see that changing at all.
Okay. And how about you, Alyssa? What's your prediction?
Well, I don't think he's going to resign for all the reasons you just heard from Katie and Greg, but talking about reelection, I would have thought until we saw the campaign finance filings that just came in that running for reelection would be a certainty. What you now see is his fundraising has severely dried up, and there really is this looming question that we've reported on about whether Adams will get these really crucial public campaign matching funds, which are themselves sort of central to the federal case against him, right? He's alleged to have illegally obtained funds through the matching funds program, but now the campaign finance board could simply pull the plug on him. So we will have to see how all that takes its course, but I think there are real questions about his reelection campaign.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to Greg. Would you just give us a really quick update about what it looks like from the numbers of funding coming in for the 2025 campaign and his legal defense fund, and sort of like how that ties in with, I don't know, his future in the next year?
I mean, both the campaign and the Legal Defense Trust filed their latest disclosure forms yesterday, and it's a disaster. He is, I mean, I think there was, one donation after he was indicted to his campaign for $250. And then there was one donation to his legal defense trust the day that he was indicted. And it's going to me, I don't know how he's going to raise money. It's going to be very challenging. I mean, and also even before he was indicted, the pace of his fundraising and his ability to get money from people had really slowed down dramatically. As you know, the word got out that there were these multiple investigations. I can count 5 of them at this point that I know of that are ongoing, by the way. This is not something that is just about over. I think this is going to go, the other part of this is going to play out over the next year. They have, in my view, based on the fact that they just fairly recently took people's phones, that you take somebody's phone, that's going to take some time. You have to go look into the phone and see what's in the phone. And then that generates more questions. So my point being, this is going to drag out for a while. And I don't know how he's going to raise money while this is going on. It just seems impossible. But, he's a resilient guy. So we'll see.
That is true. So I'm going to toss to Katie now with another bucket of questions that all were very similar to each other from folks who RSVP'd. They basically said, who's left? Meaning, who's left in the administration? So many people have been targeted. Who's running the city, and like what effect is all this happening on the day-to-day functioning of the government?
Right. That's a great question. And that's something that I'm continuously looking at. Because look, when the mayor's been asked about it, he says, "Oh, we have 300,000 city employees. Everything's great." So what if some of my top staffers left? It's a very disingenuous way to look at it, because you're counting in every teacher, every police officer, every firefighter. When what we're really focused on is, I'm looking at the New York Magazine cover from last week. It's all the senior staff. It is really bizarre that you have 2 deputy mayors leave. It's very bizarre that the health commissioner hasn't been implicated in anything, but he's resigning, and he actually pushed his departure date up. Supposed to be the end of the year, but now it was this week. So there's a mass exodus. Yeah, if you look at the scale of how many people, but if you look at how many people work within the mayor's office, I guess Tim Pearson technically worked at the sort of nonprofit Economic Development Corporation, so that's not technically the mayor's office, but these are people in this small bullseye of people that work with Eric Adams. That being said, to borrow the mayor's phrase of "we have a deep bench," there is a long list. He's a lot of deputy mayors. You could maybe question, well, why did we have a deputy mayor for public safety in the first place if we didn't really know what he did? He didn't come to the weekly press briefings. He worked out of a secret office on Pearl Street. He's been replaced by the number 2. So there's those questions, but yeah, there's still deputy mayors who have their particular portfolios and they're continuing to work on those. I will point out Maria Torres Springer, who has been promoted to first deputy mayor. She's continuing, she's sort of been promoted, but taking on, which happens, I think, in some jobs, unfortunately. It's like you get a promotion, but you also have to do the job you previously were doing, which is working on economic development, housing, and workforce. She's working on City of Yes, the mayor's large proposal to rezone the city to facilitate the building of more housing. So there's still a lot of people here doing the work. and I say all of my friends who are city employees, they really don't care who the mayor is, I don't mean that in a rude way. They're still going to teach in classrooms, they're still going to be firefighters and that kind of thing. But the upper level within City Hall and at 250 and 253 and all the other buildings around City Hall, there's still people working. But I do think, and what I'm continuing to look at is how effective can things be? We have a budget modification coming up in November. What will we see that? And what will we see with that? The city already had a hard time hiring people. We had a staff shortage stemming from the pandemic. So those are these people maybe aren't the most well-known people who leave, but if you also can't replace mid-level staffers at really pivotal city agencies, that's where you have a problem.
This is a related question that I just put into the chat, which is from Catherine. She said, not sure if you have a way of knowing this, but as a NYC public schools teacher, is there any chance of this having an effect on the Department of Ed? You touched on the Department of Ed a bit. I don't know if you can go in depth on this, but I'd imagine that there already is, at least causing some consternation from, folks who work for the Department of Ed because the schools chancellor has left.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, and speaking to people I know who work at the DOE, whether it's at Tweed or it's as teachers or administrators, I think there's always this churn of new people coming in, and then you have different priorities, maybe, different curriculum, you have different initiatives that each chancellor brings with them and carries through with them. And if David Banks, I know he claimed he wanted to leave at this point anyway, at least to the end of the year. The mayor pushed him out even earlier than that. But there are things that you want to see through, and that all trickles down to the various districts, to the superintendents, and then principals, APs, and then teachers. So that's the biggest complaint I hear from classroom teachers and even, some assistant principals and that kind of thing. It's, you have a new chancellor coming in, all of a sudden they have a new thing that they're interested in. And the new schools chancellor will see what her interest is in. But I think that is where the biggest issue is, of something that David Banks really championed, and even the mayor, what's happening now that they're distracted and Banks is gone.
Yeah. A very quick question that we got twice, actually. One from Hilla I and another on social media. People are asking if the rat czar is okay, meaning, I think, is the rat czar under indictment? I think the answer is no, but can you speak to that?
Very, very quickly, she's not under indictment. I still see her at City Hall. She did work under First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright. The sort of org chart of who works under what. I would think, wouldn't she be under sanitation? Wouldn't that be under Mir Zoshi, who's the Deputy Mayor for Operations? But again, I'm just a reporter. I don't work for the Adams administration. So she's still here. I still see her at City Hall. When they go into the gate on the other side, I don't know what they're doing, but I see them when they come out and I try to bother them. But
I don't think that the rat population has increased dramatically since the indictments came down. So I really wouldn't worry too much about that particular phobia of the mayors.
I will point out, I really do not see the largest concentrations of rats I see is at City Hall Park behind City Hall. I don't know. It's not a metaphor. They're really there. I've seen like 4 in a row. There's a video of a rat chasing a squirrel there. So I don't know what that means, but.
Wow. Metaphors. Okay. So Greg, I'm going to go to you next. We've got 2 questions. I'll read them from readers before the panel. One was from Martha G. Said, at which point in Adams' reign was he suspected of illegal activities? So that's one question. And then from Ginger A, are the charges Adams faces from his time solely as mayor, or do they go back further, for example, as Brooklyn Borough president, or even earlier as state senator in Crown Heights? So, could you take a whack at both of those?
Yeah, I could, but Rachel, you speak much faster than me. So can you just repeat the first question?
Sure.
I got the second one.
Yeah. At which point in Adams' reign was he suspected of illegal activities?
Oh yeah, okay.
And then, how far back?
No. Well, yeah, I was.
That's a joke.
I mean,
everybody.
look, I'm sorry. I can answer this question, but I just want to point out that this guy was elected with a track record of duplicitous behavior. He was implicated as a state senator in a very, very high profile, it was kind of a bid rigging scheme that involved the Aqueduct Casino in Queens. And people kind of forgot about that. When he was in the New York City Police Department, he was brought up on charges a couple times by IAB. He eventually just left. And so then he runs for borough president. So to answer the second question, the indictment that they brought against him references multiple incidents, and particularly this travel thing that he loves, while he was the borough president. So it totally goes back to when he was the borough president and then goes into when he is the mayor. It doesn't go into the state senate part, but definitely the Brooklyn borough president. And that's kind of when this Turkish Airlines thing started, where he was essentially wined and dined, according to the prosecutors, by the Turkish consulate. And the bribe, according to the prosecutors, was to give him free or deeply discounted airfare, or luxury hotel stays, or drivers in cars, and all travel stuff. But that started when he was the Brooklyn borough president, and continued to when he was mayor.
All right. I'm going to go through some of the questions we're getting from the chat. It's very active. Everybody has really good questions. And then we're going to go to you, Alyssa, to talk about all the things I want to talk to you about. These are two quick questions about the phones that were seized. One from Jonathan, who says, how many phones have been seized? I don't think we have an exact answer on that. Can we answer that for just the mayor? I think we know how many devices were seized from the mayor, right? I think it's 2 phones and an iPad, if I remember correctly.
We really don't know that answer. The only one of the phone seizure people, I call them, the David Banks specifically said that when they knocked on his door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they came into his Harlem townhouse where he lives with the first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright. They took Sheena Wright's phone, and then they took his personal phone and also his Department of Education phone. Now, why they did that, I don't know. But I mean, there's no way to know. The way they describe it is that they took the electronic devices of these various high-ranking officials. And so there's no way to really know exactly what it was, but it is clear that they were targeted for specific reasons. And that's why, and that in order to get somebody's phone, you have to go to a judge. You got to present it. You have to have probable cause. You have to show some kind of evidence or reason why you specifically want a phone, and then the judge has to sign off on it. And you can't just go in and take anybody's phone. You have to take specific phones. So there's a specific reason they were looking for specific things.
And we have a,
I wanted to
go
point
ahead.
out that the controversy that we know, it's been reported, Eric Adams, when the police came to the event he was at and came to his car to get his devices, he didn't have his personal phone on him. And of course, you think this could be an older phone that you maybe don't use anymore. But then when he brought it back the next day, that's when he changed the passcode and can't remember it.
So that's related to a question that we got from David Henley, who says, did the feds ever crack the mayor's phone?
Nope.
The answer is no. They have not done that yet.
And also, I think it's important to note that the mayor's not recollecting the password he claimed is actually part of the indictment itself, right? And this sort of suggests that the efforts, and this comes up throughout the indictment, that efforts to potentially obstruct the investigation are part of this case. And I think that is something we're going to be hearing a lot more about as the prosecution continues.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with you, Alyssa, and take us back in time. Can you talk about when the city, the newsroom, started in earnest reporting on all of these things that we're now seeing, the threads of these things that we're now seeing in these federal charges?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost hard to put a starting point on it, because we were really watching Adams's and all of the candidates. I mean, there were a lot of candidates running in 2021, like over 500 who were participating in the city's campaign finance program when you are counting city council members and all the other candidates for elected office. But we were consistently, I was and other folks in the newsroom were looking at filings to see a variety of things: who's giving, what special interests might be influencing campaigns. And we were always looking for just odd patterns of giving. And I want to just note, like, a really important investigation from the city back after that election was that a failed candidate for city controller, who later became lieutenant governor, Brian Benjamin, had very strange filings for his campaign, where he was getting public matching funds from the city campaign finance board. And the people who were supposedly donating to him, it was preposterous. It was like students and housewives or whoever they claimed to be, but all giving large sums with money orders, and it made no sense. And so we sent a reporter out to investigate that. And that was followed by a prosecution, which is still ongoing, of Benjamin for campaign finance fraud. So we were already very aware that this was out there. Adams's alleged fraud is a lot harder to find because, as we again have learned from the indictment, he and other people working with him made efforts, allegedly, to cover their tracks, right? And it becomes very, very hard to peel away. But we nonetheless, certainly back when the Manhattan DA began to prosecute a cluster of donors who were involved in what appeared to be these illegal straw donations, right? Where certain people are giving money to other people to break up into smaller amounts, donate to the campaign, and because small donations unlock public matching funds, this becomes a way to game the system to get a lot more public money for your campaign than you otherwise would qualify for. I can explain that again if I'm going too fast there, but that's the basic idea. And when the Manhattan DA began prosecuting some of these donors, but the claim by the Adams campaign was that the campaign had nothing to do with it. This was just some random people. We in the newsroom said that doesn't smell right. There's no way, because one of the people involved is somebody who's known Adams for a long time. We said there's got to be more here, and began really going over campaign filings, which we had seen anomalies already. We took another very close look at those filings, and about, I'd say, a year and a half ago at this point, a little less than that, we dove in earnest, and a team of investigative reporters, including folks on this call and other folks in our newsroom, we went out and began to start to talk to these donors of record who the Adams campaign said had given, where it just didn't seem like so many people who could have given. They all had given a particular sum of $249, $1 short of the maximum you could give and get that sum matched by the government program. And when we started, we had a multilingual team, because a lot of these donors we were looking at happened to be Chinese speakers. And we went out found their addresses, talked to them, and multiple people told us either that they had not donated themselves, or that they were reimbursed by their bosses, which is illegal, or that their signatures have been forged, all kinds of things. And this resulted in a series that we did that is not, our findings are not yet related to the specific actions that are in this criminal indictment against Adams, but they are parallel to them. They're in a different, they took place in Queens and in Brooklyn, and would be part of the jurisdiction of a different U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of New York. But we have been, and you readers of the city know this, we've been on this reporting, digging into apparently fraudulent campaign finance filings for about a year and a half now. And, we are, just now starting to see law enforcement pursuing the findings that it has come up with.
And I want to just ask Katie, because you were involved with some of the phone calls, the door knocking a bit, to talk to those folks who we found, allegedly had not actually sort of given this money. And I just want to pause there and just re-explain what a straw donor is, because this is super central to all of this. It basically is somebody gives money to a campaign and then is reimbursed, by the person who actually does want to have the influence. So, they're bundling up a whole bunch of money to give to a candidate, but they're doing it in separate parts through other people to make it look like small dollar donations. So with that said, Katie, can you talk about where this, where we found this perhaps happening, and what type of folks this was?
Yeah, I did not door knock. I don't want to take any of the valor away from my colleagues who did a lot of that shoe leather. But I think what first made us look at it was looking at some of those 2021 donations to Mayor Adams. And the one that I first saw was this cluster of employees who work at J-Mart, which is a supermarket within the New World Mall in downtown Flushing. And just this, all these people who are cashiers and have jobs that are presumably minimum wage, all donating the same amount on the same date. It did raise a red flag for me, right? And I think obviously people can give, and where people's generosity is, that's up to them. And if they really feel passionately about Eric Adams as a candidate, of course they can maybe give as much as they can, but that's sort of the starting point of these I know with the Brian Benjamins, I wasn't involved with that, but it was the manner in which the money was donated and money orders, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Alyssa, and it was all kind of the same number. So you kind of look for these anomalies, and yeah, I mean, your hunch isn't proven until you actually go out and talk to people. And that's what happened when our colleagues went out and spoke to people, and there was confusion about what they gave and how much they gave, and, or, they didn't give at all, or they were told to give. So that was the first flag for us.
Yeah, and I want to just add one thing to what Katie was saying. Katie was looking at those donations, and we had discussed them and were aware of the anomalies in May of 2022. I mean, I went back and looked at my files from that period. And I should say, just this is a bit of a pitch for support for the city's newsroom. We have limited resources, and we have to make very difficult decisions every day about what we prioritize. And we knew something was wrong. We knew that it would take an investigation, like a real long-term investigation, to uncover it. And at the time, we did not have funding for an investigations team. We had reporters with the skills, but it was when we had that funding for a team about a year later that we were actually able to say, you know what, those $249 donations from the cashiers at J-Mart are fishy. And now we have the resources to go after it to a degree that we didn't have. I really don't think we could have done it a year earlier in the way that we did. So just had to stress that.
Yeah, that's really important to say, because we do a lot with a little, and we can always do more if we have more resources. I'm going to go to some questions in our Q&A because we have a lot coming in. We have a couple of questions about Governor Kathy Hochul's role in all of this. Justin asks, I'd appreciate any clarification on Kathy Hochul's role in all of this. And then we have another question from Barbara, who wants for us to talk more about Hochul and why she may be so reluctant or afraid to kick Adams out. Who can take that one? Maybe Katie or Greg? Yeah, go ahead. I don't
know if you saw her quote was from either today or yesterday, where she said she was very happy that she'd had this conversation with him, and he had taken these actions to essentially clean house. So it puts her in the position where she looks like she's the one who took action, but she didn't actually have to take action and kick him out. So it's kind of a win-win for her. And then when Adams was asked about this at one of his gracious off-topic press conferences that he does once a week, he was essentially asked, is Kathy Hochul determining who is hired or fired at the City Hall? He was outraged by this and said, this is not at all the case. So this is, I don't know, I think this is a little dance that's going on here where she doesn't have to really do anything other than to have this kind of performative, I had conversations. And then the other part of this that's just through the looking glass is that Eric Adams still insists that every single one of these resignations has nothing to do with the investigations. He keeps saying this over and over. It's because, well, it was my time. I just felt it. I have personal things I have to deal with. It's time for me to move on, blah, blah, blah. And, the fact that you had your phone taken by the FBI, did that play into it? I don't know. But I can just tell you that there's a lot of kind of performative aspect to what's going on between Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams.
And
on that point, I'm going to just drop into the chat a story that Katie wrote recently. The headline on that story is Mayor says mass exodus is normal behavior. If anybody wants to read that one, it's a good example of what Greg is talking about. Go ahead, Katie.
Well, my editor Hassan Gittins said a lot of that. The headline was his, and that's why it was so good. But I think too, we have to think of the political aspect. Kathy Hochul, Governor Hochul, she's very vulnerable. She almost lost when she ran. in 2022. And this is a state that's predominantly Democratic. It was not looking good for her. And I think some of her instincts politically are not always bold. And I think the last thing Kathy Hochul wants to do is she's trying to shore up her base for her own reelection is to remove the largest city in the state's second Black mayor, perhaps prematurely. So she took this wait and see approach. She said, oh, the mayor's bringing in new blood. I mean, what he really was doing was just, I kind of compared it to like baseball. There weren't any trades being made. They were just getting called up from like the Binghamton Mets. You know, like the number 2 was becoming the number 1. It's not like new people are really coming in. I mean, the exception is Tom Donlin, who's the interim police commissioner, and then even his phones got raided, his house got raided or whatever. I don't think devices were taken, it was documents, unrelated to all of this, but still. So she's not going to take that huge step, at least not yet. And I think she's going to wait until the very last moment. If this is going to be a thing that she's going to do, it is going to be, it's not going to be anytime soon if she does it. And I think also people are trying to hold out, and we've done reporting on this. You have, Rachel, the timeline of what would trigger a special election, and that's a open primary. So Democrats run, Republicans run, and I think the fear there is who could hop into an open primary and who would she not want. So if she could hold until March, and I forget the exact date, then there's no.
Yeah.
That's a little tricky.
Yeah, and looking ahead to 2025, we really don't know what's going to happen, but it's, you know, we're some sort of election is going to happen one way or the other. We do have a question from Joy C, who asked, would Brad Lander challenge Jamani Williams should Adam step down? I don't think the answer to that is quite directly yes, because if I remember correctly, well, first I'll back up. Brad Lander, city comptroller. Jamani Williams is the public advocate. So those two people have made noise already to run in 2025. But I believe that Jamani Williams has said that he would only run in a special election, not the broad primary in June. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's been some reporting that he's said that. He's sort of avoided the question when it's been asked him directly. Even when he was asked directly, do you think the mayor should step down? Brad Lander and Jamani Williams, they have a friendship, or at least I don't know if they're really hanging out in real life, but publicly they're very close and aligned politically, and they've been allies on a lot of issues. And yeah, I think even there's been some speculation that Brad Lander, although he's announced he's running for mayor and he's fundraising, he could still, if things shift, jump back into, I don't know the deadline for that. So that is a good question. Again, a lot of variables could go into what would definitely happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to drop into the chat as an answer to Joy, our guide on who's running for so far in 2025. We also update that frequently. There's been a lot of movement on that. Katie, do you want to talk? I mean, you don't have to go through every single person, but sort of the people who have said so far that they want to throw their hat in the ring there.
Yeah, and the Democratic ticket, Brad Lander, Scott Stringer, Eleanor Myrie, Jessica Ramos. We saw last week and a little bit of this week how much money they raised this filing. So we have that, a story with that, with all that. I can't remember the numbers. I'm sorry. I hadn't write it all down, but how much money they've raised. Obviously, Scott Stringer, a long time elected official. He ran in 2021. And, this to him is like his comeback. Eleanor Myrie, a state senator from Brooklyn, who actually represents the district that Eric Adams represented 2 people ago. I'm trying to think because there was Jesse Hamilton in between. Jesse Hamilton, someone else who got his phone seized in this administration. State Senator Jessica Ramos, who represents parts of Queens. Curtis Lee was running in the Republican line. There's other people who, in terms of, we try to look at how much money they've raised and name recognition as well. So that's who's running. And there's rumors of former Governor Andrew Cuomo, Attorney General Tish James potentially running. And I think the Cuomo scenario and the possibility is what some people have reported, and people who've been speaking to the governor have said is one of the reasons she wants to avoid an open primary.
Okay.
They're looming. They're kind of floating in the distance.
Speaking of 2025, Alyssa, I'm going to go to you to talk a little bit about the campaign finance side of this. And I know this is a little bit in the weeds, so bear with us, but we have gotten a lot of questions about the city's campaign finance system and sort of how all of this reflects on it and its future, and sort of how people think about it and how they trust it. But before we talk about that, can you just talk about like, what is the city's finance system? Why is it special? And sort of before it was implemented, why were people excited about this thing that is at the center of the Adams investigations?
Right. So, I mean, we've had the Campaign Finance Board and some form of a matching funds program. I'm going to get some of the history wrong, so people can, viewers can correct me in the chat on any of the ancient history here. But basically, late 1980s, following municipal scandals back then, and the idea was to get big money out of elections, right, and give candidates who might not have deep pockets or lobbyist friends or corporate donors, give them a leg up. And it's a voluntary system. You do not have to participate. So for example, when Mike Bloomberg ran for mayor 3 times, he did not participate. He self-financed his campaigns. But we both have, we have limits on contributions generally, but if, for the candidates who participate in this matching funds program, you agree that, currently the maximum donation that you can take from any giver in primary general is $2,100 for a mayoral candidate. And in exchange for agreeing to those limits, you then get to tap this vast amount of public funding. For every dollar that you raise from a New York City resident, up to the first $250 of their donation, unless that resident happens to be like a lobbyist or, if there's a few other exceptions that are meant to avoid undue influence. But basically, if you give up to $250, that is going to be matched $8 to $1. And I should also note that this 2021 election that has led to these 2 very prominent straw donor prosecutions that we have talked about, right, that with Eric Adams and before him Brian Benjamin, was the first time that that matching program had become so generous and given $8. And also, of course, we have the infamous Bling Bishop, Lamar Whitehead, also prosecuted for fraud in the program and ultimately convicted of related charges, although I think not for the fraud itself, which can be harder to prove. But I think that it's not coincidental that we are seeing this kind of ratcheted up attempt to exploit this very generous program as it's gotten more and more generous. And I think what's really happened with the Adams campaign now is that it's really a kind of historic test of this system, which really has been successful over many decades, and I have to hand it to the Campaign Finance Board, which really does very carefully audit, monitor, administer, train. They do all of this work to make sure that this money is really going for its intended purpose. And what's happened with the Adams campaign in a kind of unprecedented way is that, when this came out in a lot of the reporting that the city has done on the Adams 2021 campaign, that the campaign and their attorneys just systematically challenged the board to just tell them that they couldn't do something. In other words, for instance, campaigns are required to say, well, who's doing the fundraising for them? Who's gathering, they're called intermediaries, who's serving as intermediaries, which is a really important piece of information to know, right? Because it tells you sort of who the hands are behind the scenes. The Adams campaign said, no, we're not reporting them. We don't think we have to. And they would just cite all kinds of technicalities to say they didn't have to. So I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but I think the point is that we've really seen an unprecedented attempt to kind of take the system that was supposed to really enhance democracy and really open out access to campaigns and to small donors. And instead, it's really become a tool for big donors to manipulate the system. And I think that's the real test. And we've yet to see whether the campaign finance system can kind of withstand this assault or whether other candidates might try to emulate it.
Okay. Yeah. Got a question about the sort of transparency of the administration. And I think it's not controversial to say that the Adams administration has been pretty hostile to press and also really closed-mouthed and not as open as previous mayors. So Katie, I'll ask you, what has it been like to report on a mayor who's clearly trying to keep information from the public, or at least not be open and transparent with the press? What is it like to go through that process?
Before I get into that, I will, on Thanksgiving Eve 2021, then Mayor-elect Eric Adams went to the balloon inflation on the Upper West Side, and I went too. And he said, I asked him, I said, you're very private. You were private as a candidate. There was a lot of stuff you didn't want to reveal. We didn't know for certain where you lived. You had to give us a tour of your house in Brooklyn where you claimed to live to prove it. What's it going to be like for you when you're mayor? Because there's an expectation of not being so private. And he said at the time that he will be the most transparent mayor in history, and the reporters will be very happy with it. I recorded that video and I said, oh, this is going to come in handy for a while. And it has. And that being said, covering this, I found the biggest I covered de Blasio a little bit. I was a different reporter at a different outlet. And now, I covered him full time at a previous outlet. And now this is sort of my first time, like, fully covering a mayor from the beginning at one outlet, and solely just covering like City Hall. I find the biggest challenge is not just that his communications office will refuse to answer your questions. They won't text you back. They won't email you back. You'll call them. They don't pick up. You ask them 5 questions. They answer none of them and give you a statement that has nothing to do with what you asked. And then when you say, hey, this has nothing to do with what I asked, they ignore you. It trickles down into the agency press offices. So they've made it so it's not just that they're unhelpful, but they don't want anyone at any agency to be helpful to you. And I know for a fact that they purposely tried to block this outlet from getting just any information at all, even about things that we've written about. They've said, don't tell anybody, try to give it to someone else. So for me, I take that very personally. And I think, okay, my job is to write articles and get information, and your purpose, it's one thing to ignore me. It's another thing to say, do not tell anyone from the city this information. So that's what it's like. And, I find the mayor himself is he's charming and he's affable. So you could have fun with him that way. But his staff is, their FOIL, they just don't answer FOILs back. It's constant delays. I can try to send in constructive denials, but it's getting any basic information. It is like worse than pulling teeth. I'm not a dentist, but it's horrible. And, they think they could, and then they're assault on the press, which is predominantly white, but this idea that you're all racist for covering the mayor this way, and we're just going to circumvent you and go to other outlets. It's a bizarre strategy, and I'll say, it's not working. So their strategy is not working clearly. So Greg can also answer. I know he always has lots of things to say about the press office.
I actually have a different question for Greg.
Oh, no.
Although I'd love to hear him on this, but it's a question from Vicky about the Department of Investigation specifically. Greg, and I know you've covered the DOI a lot, but she's asking, what about the Department of Investigation being so short-staffed? And I want to broaden it a little bit to talk about, what are the people or organizations or agencies rather in city government that can keep the mayor accountable? DOI is one of them. And can you talk about the staffing issues there?
Okay. First of all, DOI is supposed to be an independent agency, although the commissioner is appointed by the mayor and has to be approved by the city council. And the way it works is they have inspectors general for different agencies. So there's one for the New York City Housing Authority, there's one for the Department of Buildings, and there's one that kind of oversees the mayor's office. And let's start with, before I address the staffing issue, let's start with the fact that this investigation that resulted in the indictment of a sitting New York City mayor started in 2021. So think about that for a minute. He wasn't even mayor yet. And I have good knowledge that the Department of Investigation has been involved in this pretty much from the start. So the resources, part of the problem with the resources is that this is a heavy lift. It's a lot of work. So there's a lot of focus on this particular investigation, as there should be. And as a result, there's kind of there's a certain amount of strain within DOI, because over the last, I think 3 years, the administration has consistently tried to cut their budget. And they have, in fact, because of that, there's been a lot of pressure where the caseload has gone up for specific investigators, and there's been attrition, and the attrition has not been replaced. So what you have is a lot fewer investigators trying to do the same work they were doing when the administration started, and that's a strain. I mean, it makes everybody's life more difficult when you have to do the same work you were doing, only there's 5 people less to do it. And also, in addition to that, you have this crazy, actually sprawling investigation. It's not just the mayor; it's multiple, deputy mayors. It's the school's chancellor. It's the police department. We haven't even talked about the police department and the stuff that's going on over there. So I mean, by the way, DOI has an inspector general who looks at NYPD. So there is this thing is it's like it's an octopus, and it's hard to like keep track of, or maybe whack-a-mole, I guess is what it is. Like, oh, wait a minute, we found this. Wait a minute, there's something else over here. So this is a very heavy lift, this investigation.
Actually, speaking of the police department, we have a question in the Q&A from Daniel H. Asking, is the police department leadership the most troubled agency that we've seen so far? And when will the next police commissioner be named? Do we know the answer to the last one?
Donlan's still in there, even though Donlan can't get FBI clearance because his house was raided by the FBI. But he's still there. And once again, I think it was on Tuesday, the mayor was asked, when's the next police commissioner? And he said, we'll give you an announcement when we make one. But in the interim, Donlan is in charge of the police department. So there's no timeline on it that we are aware of. There's a lot of speculation about that. But I mean, in terms of the most troubled agency, we don't have a completely clear idea of what exactly Eddie Caban, the police commissioner who had to resign after he had his house raided and his phone taken. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but we do have some idea that because his brother, who by the way lives across the street from him upstate, James, who's a former cop, has been implicated in a scheme to essentially shake down nightclub owners, right, or a nightclub owner in Brooklyn. And the scheme was fairly straightforward. The nightclub makes a lot of noise. Why does it do that? Because it's a nightclub. And the neighborhood is not happy about this. So where do they go? They complain to the precinct. Precinct comes over, starts giving this guy a lot of trouble. All of a sudden, the nightclub owner gets a call from the mayor's nightclub czar. And the nightclub czar says, listen, I have a solution for you. I'm going to have my buddy call you, and he's going to like help you deal with this problem. And his buddy is Eddie Caban's brother, James Caban. James Caban then reaches out, and this is according to the nightclub owner who saved the texts from James, in which he said, if you pay me a certain amount of money, I will handle the precinct. So that is essentially it, and again, James has not been charged and Eddie has not been charged, but the way it's been described by this nightclub owner, it's a protection racket. And it's like old school mafia stuff. So, I mean, is this the most troubled agency? We're going to see, because I mean, this stuff's not going away.
So thank you. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, I'm hearing a lot of people in this Adams circle who are related, who know each other, siblings, you're not crazy. We wrote a story about that exact thing. I just dropped it in the chat. This was by Greg and myself. We wrote about all the different family ties in the Adams inner circle. So if you haven't read that one, it's a pretty good one if you're kind of confused. All right, we've got a question from Stephanie about the city council. And maybe Katie and maybe Alyssa could take this one. She's asking, could you summarize what you've seen city council doing or not doing to create new laws or tighten laws or regulations to help stop avenues of corruption? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can point to one bill that was introduced by Councilmember Lincoln Ressler from Brooklyn. It's to now there's a limit. Like if you were like, say, Frank Carone, the mayor's former chief of staff, there was a limitation on how long, about a year, how long for you to lobby other city people. But we saw this with former Speaker of the City Council, Corey Johnson. He on December 31st, 2021, or close to that, he formed an LLC and he became a lobbyist. And he started lobbying the mayor's office. And I was like, well, that seems unfair. And they said, well, no, he can't lobby the city council for you, but he can lobby the mayor's office. So it's these sort of rules that they don't seem to go far enough for some council members. So that was one bill that Lincoln Ressler introduced. It would, you'd have to wait longer in order to do that. I think some people even called it the Frank Carone bill. So that's one way you could maybe look at corruption, especially people who used to work used to work in government, you were a public servant, and then you leave and you immediately turn around and you're in the private sector and you charge a lot of money for the access and the relationships you have, which some people could point to as one avenue to be corrupt because, you're just selling access essentially. Yeah, and I think the council can continue, they have oversights and investigations, and they kind of try to look through things and especially figuring out ways there will be corruption. But I also think it comes down to money, which is what Greg spoke about briefly. DOI's budget has been reduced, but so has the citizen CCRB, which is where regular people can go and complain about police officers. Their budget has been cut as well, so there's fewer things they can investigate now. So I think you dry up these investigative agencies and departments, and the council, obviously there's always a budget negotiation and dance and stuff, so there's only so much money that can be funded with that. But I don't know if Alyssa, if you want to add a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we are going to, I hope we will start to see, and again, Ressler is starting to play a role in this as I think he's chair of government operations, but the council in fact has powers that it does not use to be a check on the mayor's power. And we, Greg and I just wrote a piece for the city about an example of this, where we're yet another avenue that we have not talked about of investigation are real estate deals, where the city government has been leasing millions of square feet, or I shouldn't say millions, it probably does add up to millions, but at least hundreds of thousands of square feet.
It's millions.
It is millions of office space from private landlords who have been lobbying the city, some of whom have also been donors to the mayor's campaigns or his legal defense fund. And in the course of this, it became clear to me as we were reporting the story that the council, in fact, has the discretionary power to review each and every one of these leases, at least these major leases that go through a whole process involving the City Planning Commission. And hats off to the City Planning Commission. They do take that role seriously. They have their public hearings. They ask good questions. They sign off on the leases, but the council has not weighed in. Each time they basically waived their power to review these leases. And so we called this out in this article, and I do hope, and that's just one example of an existing ability to check on the mayor that they have not been exercising. And I do think that this is an important test, really. New York City's government is set up to have a strong mayor and a relatively weak city council. So there's only so much the council can do to be a check on the mayor, but at the very least they can and should be using the powers that they already do have.
Okay, we're at 8:29, so I'm gonna have to wrap up because there's a Mets game on and I know that we're gonna lose people. So Diana, who's on the back end here, would you put up the screen there? I've got to make a plug here for donations. We are powered by New Yorkers. We love our readers and we appreciate when they can support us. So if you feel compelled to help us out so we can do more reporting, please scan this QR code or go to donorbox.com/AdamsWorld. And I just want to say we've had at one point we had 150 people in here. I think that's pretty good for a Wednesday night. I love how curious everyone is, how much they're paying attention to this. We've gotten a lot of questions in the chat we did not have time to answer. We've gotten some really good questions about what happens with the closed Rikers plan now, what happens with the city of Yes and the housing plan now. How does that get done now that all this is going on? We've gotten some tips, some news tips for further things to investigate in the Q&A, which I love. A lot of questions about who's going to run in 2025 and all the implications there. So I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of those questions, but if you have a burning question that you didn't get an answer to, please email ask@thecity.nyc. I'm going to drop that in the chat. Hold on just a moment. ask@thecity.nyc. And we would be happy to further answer questions. And thank you for supporting the city. This has been really great. We hope to do more of these events. And please stay tuned for more. You know, we'll be writing, and we are very happy to have you read. So thank you for being with us. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.